she screamed. "Tow it right now." As the siren lights washed over my driveway, and before I could even say a word, a clipboard was shoved in my face like a weapon. My vintage truck was already hooked, chains tight, metal crying, and Karen stood there smiling like she owned the street. "HOA order," she said loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "You're not allowed to park that junk here." I looked around and saw curtains moving, phones coming out, my kid standing behind me gripping my jacket. I stayed calm, because panic is what people like her feed on. One cop stepped closer and said, "Sir, step away from the vehicle." Karen jumped in fast. "He's aggressive." I feel unsafe. That word hung in the air. Unsafe. I slowly raised my hands, not in fear, but to show control, and said, "This is my land." She laughed and tapped a fake notice taped to my door. "Not anymore." The tow driver revved the engine, ready to pull, when Karen leaned close to me and whispered, "People like you always think rules don't apply." I looked at her, then at the cop, then at my truck, and quietly said, "You really shouldn't have brought police into this." One officer frowned, confused, while the other reached for his radio. That was the moment Karen didn't see coming, because this was only the beginning, and she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The cop's radio crackled, but Karen cut in again, louder this time. "He's refusing HOA orders. That truck is a violation." She crossed her arms like a judge passing sentence. I asked calmly, "Can you tell me which rule?" She smirked. "All of them." The officer looked at the paper on my door, frowned, and said, "This notice doesn't have a case number." Karen snapped back, "We don't need one. HOA has authority." The tow truck started pulling anyway, the chains tightening, my truck jerking forward just an inch, enough to make my kid gasp. That's when I stepped in front of it. "Sir, move," the cop warned. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "If that truck moves again, this turns into an unlawful seizure." Karen laughed, sharp and proud. "Listen to him. He thinks he knows the law." I slowly reached into my jacket. Karen screamed, "Gun." "He's reaching for a gun." Both cops froze, hands tense. I pulled out my phone instead and said, "I've been recording since you arrived." Her smile faded for half a second. One officer asked, "Why are you recording?" I answered, "Because last time someone tried this, they went to court." Karen jumped in again. "He's lying. He's a troublemaker." I tapped my screen, showed the time, the address, the notice, everything. Then I said quietly, "Before you tow my truck, you might want to know who actually owns this land." The officer blinked. "What do you mean?" I leaned closer and said the line that made Karen stiffen. "This HOA doesn't exist." Karen's face went pale, then red. "He's lying," she snapped, pointing at me. "He's been a problem since day one." One cop stepped aside and made a call, his voice low. The other stayed with us, eyes moving between Karen, the tow truck, and my phone still recording. "Ma'am," he said, "can you show me your HOA ID?" She scoffed and dug into her bag, pulling out a plastic badge that looked new. Too new. He turned it over, frowned again. "This isn't registered." Karen laughed, but it sounded forced. "We're private. You won't find us online." That's when the tow driver cut the engine and said, "I don't like this." Karen shot him a look that could cut glass. "Do your job." The officer who was on the phone came back. "Sir, now, dispatch says this address is not under any active HOA." Karen stepped back, shaking her head. "That's impossible. I run it." I finally spoke, calm and steady. "You don't run anything here," she screamed. "Arrest him." He threatened me. My kid started crying. That sound changed the air. The officer looked at Karen and said, "Ma'am, making a false report is serious." She pointed at me again, desperate now. "He's hiding something. Ask him why he's so calm." I reached into my wallet, not fast, not slow, and said, "You're right. I am hiding something." I opened it just enough for the badge to catch the light. The officers froze. Karen leaned in, squinting. "What is that?" I looked straight at her and said quietly, "It's the reason you should stop." The officer closest to me swallowed and said, "Sir, can you step back and show that again?" I opened my wallet fully this time. No rush, no words, just the badge. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. "That's fake," she blurted out, but her voice shook. The second officer straightened up fast, suddenly respectful. "Federal?" he asked. I nodded once. "Off duty." Karen laughed aloud. "So what? That doesn't mean he can break HOA rules." The officer turned to her. "Ma'am, stop." She didn't. She stepped forward, pointing at my chest. "You think flashing a badge scares me?" I clicked my phone and played a short clip. Her voice from earlier saying, "Tow it even if he resists." Silence. Even the tow driver looked away. The officer said, "Ma'am, you ordered a seizure without authority." Karen backed up. "I was enforcing community standards." I leaned in slightly and said, "You impersonated an HOA, interfered with property, and filed a false police report." Her eyes darted around, looking for support that wasn't there. "He's threatening me again," she yelled. The officer raised his hand. "Enough." He reached for his cuffs. Then his radio crackled again. "Unit on scene," dispatch said. "We're sending a supervisor." Karen smiled, weak but hopeful. "Good. Let them sort this out." I closed my wallet and said softly, "They already know my name." The supervisor's SUV pulled up slow, like he already knew how this would end. He stepped out, glanced at my truck, the tow rake, Karen's face, then at me. His eyes stopped for half a second. "And that was enough, sir," he said, nodding slightly. "Good to see you again." Karen's smile collapsed. "Again?" she whispered. The supervisor turned to the officers. "Why is a private tow attached to a federally registered vehicle on private land?" Karen rushed in, words spilling. "He's abusing power. He threatened me. He can't park that truck here." The supervisor didn't even look at her. "Ma'am, step back." She didn't. She grabbed his sleeve. "You have to listen to me. That was the wrong move." He gently removed her hand. "Do not touch me." Karen's voice cracked. "I'm the HOA." He finally looked at her. "No. You're not." He nodded to the officer. "Run her name." Karen started shaking. "This is harassment." The officer read from his screen. "Ma'am, you have prior warnings for trespass and false complaints." Neighbors stepped out now. Phones up. Karen tried one last push. "He thinks he owns this place because he's federal." I spoke, calm as ever. "I own it because I bought it," the supervisor said. "And because there is no HOA here." Karen screamed, "This isn't over." The supervisor sighed and said the words that flipped everything. "Actually, it is." Karen froze. For 1 second, she really thought someone would save her. Then the cuffs clicked. The sound was loud, final. "You can't do this," she cried. Looking around at the phones, the neighbors, anyone. "I was just keeping order." The supervisor saw Karen sat in the back of the car. Head down now. No shouting left. The street felt different, lighter. The supervisor asked if I wanted to press charges. I said, "I already am." He nodded like he expected that answer. One officer came back with my phone and said, "Your footage is clean." "Very clean," I told him. That's why I stayed calm. The tow driver apologized, eyes low, and said he'd testify if needed. Neighbors slowly came closer, some thanking me, some just relieved. One older man said, "She told us we'd lose our house." That hit. The supervisor looked around and said loud, "Enough for everyone. There is no HOA here. No one has the right to touch your property." Karen heard that from the car and banged the window once, then stopped. As the car drove away, my kid asked, "Is she coming back?" I knelt down and said, "No, not here." The supervisor shook my hand. "You didn't flash that badge until you had to," he said. I replied, "Power only matters when you control it." He smiled and left. That night, I sat on my porch, my truck parked right where it always was. The same street. But now everyone knew the truth. And somewhere in a holding cell, Karen finally understood one thing she never did before. You can't bully the wrong person forever. Morning came quiet. No notes on doors. No strange cars slowing down. My truck sat there in the sun like it always belonged. Because it did. A few neighbors waved as they passed, different now, stronger. One woman brought coffee and said, "You saved us." I shook my head. "You saved yourselves. You just needed the truth." Later that day, I got a call. Karen was being charged for impersonating authority, false reports, and attempted theft. More victims came forward. The case got bigger than her ego ever was. I hung up and looked at my badge, then locked it away again. I didn't need it anymore. That night, my kid climbed into the truck, ran his hand over the old dashboard, and smiled. "They can't take it now, right?" I said. "They never could." I sat there for a moment and thought about how close it came, how fast lies spread when people stay quiet. Then I said the line I knew would stick with anyone who heard this story. Freedom isn't loud, but when it speaks, bullies fall silent. The engine started. The streets stayed calm. And that was the real. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived. Not from court, from the city. The land Karen claimed as community-controlled was never approved for any HOA, ever. Her fake rules had blocked emergency access routes for years. That made it federal. The same case she started exposed a bigger mess. Fines followed. Charges stacked up. Her name showed up online, tied to every complaint. People who once feared her now spoke freely. One evening, I drove my truck past a station by chance. I saw her through the glass, sitting alone, no confidence left. She looked smaller somehow. She didn't see me. She didn't need to. The damage was already done. I drove home slow, parked in my driveway, and turned off the engine. My kid said, "Why do bad people act so big?" I thought for a second and said, "Because they hope no one checks." I locked the door, looked at my home, and felt peace. She tried to take my truck, but what she really lost was control. And that's the twist. No bully ever plans. Months passed, and life moved on. But the street never forgot. New families moved in, kids played freely, no fear of fake rules or sudden threats. That space Karen tried to control became the safest place on the block. One day, my kid asked why people still talked about that lady. I said, "Because some lessons protect people long after the nose ends." The truck still turns heads when I start it. Not because it's old, but because it stands for something now. Neighbors smile when they hear it. I never used my badge again. I never had to. Because the real power wasn't federal. It was truth, patience, and knowing when to stand your ground. She tried to seize my truck. She tried to scare my family. But in the end, she exposed herself. And that's the line people remember. She came from my property and lost her freedom instead. Years later, someone new knocked on my door. A young officer this time, nervous but respectful. He said, "Sir, they still use your case in training." I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" He smiled. "What happens when someone pretends power is theirs?" After he left, I stood there for a moment, looking at the same driveway where it all started. Same truck, same land, different world. Karen was long gone from this street, from authority, from relevance, but the lesson stayed. I started the engine, the sound deep and steady, and thought about how close it all came to being stolen with a lie. Then I said it out loud, just to myself. They didn't freeze because of my badge. They froze because truth finally showed up, and I drove off, knowing some battles end, but their impact never does. One last twist came when I least expected it. A call from a lawyer. Karen had tried to sue. Not me, but the city, claiming she was misled. The case lasted 10 minutes. The judge watched the footage, leaned back, and said, "You weren't misled. You were exposed. Case dismissed. No appeal." I walked out, sunlight hitting my face, phone buzzing with messages from neighbors who heard the news already. That night, I parked my truck the same way I always had, shut the door, and sat quietly for a second. No anger, no pride, just calm, because the real win wasn't seeing her lose. It was knowing my kid grew up watching one clear thing happen. When someone tries to steal what's yours with fear, standing still and telling the truth is sometimes the strongest move you'll ever. The final part didn't happen in court or on the street. It happened months later, when a small sign went up at the entrance of our road. Simple words, clear, private properties, no HOA jurisdiction. People stopped to read it like it was a warning and a promise at the same time. I stood there with my kid, watching cars pass, without slowing down, without fear. He looked up at me and said, "So nobody can pretend again?" I shook my head. Not here. That night, I covered my truck, turned off the porch light, and went inside knowing something important had changed. Not just for us, for everyone who watched and learned. Karen tried to rule with nose and fear, but the quiet truth took everything from her. And that's how it ended. No sirens, no shouting. Just freedom sitting right where it always. One more thing. And this is what people never expect. A year later, that same vintage truck won an award at the local show, Best Restored Classic. When they called my name, I didn't talk about engines or paint. I just said, "This truck stayed here," because I knew my rights. People clap harder than I thought they would. A reporter asked, "Was it ever about the truck?" I smiled and said, "No, it was about someone thinking fear works." Forever, that clip went around online. Karen's name came up again, but only as a warning. The street stayed quiet, the land stayed ours, and every time I turned the key, I remember the real twist of it all. She tried to take my truck, but what she really gave us was proof that truth, one scene, can't be told. Years rolled on, but the story didn't fade the way people think stories do. It didn't sit quietly in the past. It kept showing up in small ways, unexpected ways, like echoes that refused to die. Every time a new family moved in, someone would quietly explain what happened on this street, not with drama, just facts. We don't have an HOA here. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. That sentence became a shield. One summer afternoon, a moving truck blocked part of the road. A man in a polo shirt jumped out, clipboard in hand. Already annoyed, he started barking orders at the driver. Old habits, old energy. I watched from my porch as a neighbor walked over and calmly asked, "Who told you to do that?" The man said, "Community rules." The neighbor smiled and replied, "Wrong street." The man hesitated, laughed awkwardly, and backed off. No shouting, no cops, just memory doing its job. That's when I realized something. Karen didn't just lose power. Tower itself lost credibility here. People stopped assuming loud meant right. They started asking questions, and questions are dangerous to people who lie for a living. One night, my kid came home from school quiet. Too quiet. I asked what was wrong. He said a classmate told him his dad got someone arrested. I sat down with him and said, "I didn't get anyone arrested. She arrested herself." He thought about that for a long time. Then he nodded. Because she wouldn't stop. Exactly. A few months later, I got invited to speak at a local veterans group. They didn't advertise it. No flyers, just word of mouth. When I got there, it wasn't about medals or stories from overseas. It was about coming home and still having to fight. Quietly. One guy said an HOA fined him for flying a flag. Another said they towed his car while he was at work. I didn't give advice. I just told them what happened when I stayed calm and kept recording. The room went silent. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was. After that, things sped up. Someone leaked Karen's full history. Not just our street, others, different cities, same pattern. Fake authority, pressure, fear. People realized she wasn't an exception. She was a type. And once you name a type, you can see it coming. One morning, a city inspector showed up unannounced. Not to inspect me, to thank me, he said. "Your case forced us to audit a lot of records," I asked, and he exhaled. "You'd be surprised how many HOAs are just someone with a printer and confidence." That sentence stuck with me. Confidence without limits is dangerous. My truck became more than a truck. People asked about it at gas stations. Some knew the story, some didn't. A man once ran his hand along the hood and said, "They don't make them like this anymore." I reply, "They never did. That's why it lasted." He smiled like he knew I wasn't just talking about metal. Then came the copycats. Different town, same energy. A woman tried to issue fines on a block nearby. Someone recorded her. The video went online. The comments were brutal, but effective. Police stepped in early. No towing. No kids crying. Prevention. That's the part nobody talks about. How one story can stop 10 more before they start. But not everything was clean. One evening, I got a letter. No return address. Inside was a single line. "You ruined my life." No signature. No threat. Just blame. I stared at it for a while, then folded it and threw it away. Ruined lives don't get ruined by truth. They collapse under it. A year later, my kid asked if Karen hated us. I said, she hated being told no. Big difference. He nodded again. He was getting good at that. Time has a way of exposing what people really are. Karen tried to rebuild herself online. New name, new profile, new town. It didn't last. Someone recognized her face. Screenshots spread. Silence followed. You can outrun one mistake. You can't outrun a pattern. Meanwhile, our street became boring. And boring is beautiful. Kids' packages left on porches without fear. No warning signs, no threats, just space. One night, during a storm, the power went out. Neighbors came out with flashlights. Someone joked, "At least the HOA can't complain." Everyone laughed. That laugh wasn't about her anymore. It was about relief. Years passed again. I got older. My truck did too. Still ran strong. Still parked where it always had been. One afternoon, I caught my kid sitting in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, just staring. I asked what he was doing. He said, remembering. Remembering what? That you didn't yell. That hit harder than anything else. Because that was the real twist no one expects. Not the badge. Not the arrest. Not the exposure. It was restraint. Calm scares bullies more than force ever will. I was invited onto a local podcast once. They wanted drama. I gave them quiet. I said, if you want power, learn the rules. If you want control, break them. That's how you tell the difference. The clip went around. People argued about it. Good. Arguing means thinking. Another year, another knock. This time it was a young couple. New homeowners, nervous. They asked, is it true what they say about this street? I smiled. Depends what they say, they said. That someone tried to take over and failed. I nodded. That part's true. They relaxed instantly. And that's when I knew the story had finished doing its job. Not because everyone clapped. Not because someone went to jail. But because fear didn't live here anymore. On quiet nights, I still sit on the porch. Same view, same truck. Different weight in the air. The kind that comes when people know their ground is solid. And sometimes, when the street is empty and the engine cools after a drive. I think about that first moment. The chains tightening. The chains tightening. The lie spoken with confidence. The crowd waiting to see who would fold. She thought power was nose. She thought authority was a tone. She thought fear lasted forever. But land remembers. People remember. And truth. Truth doesn't need permission to stay. That's why nothing else ever happened here again. Because the wrong person tried once. And everyone, nothing dramatic happened after that. And that's the point most people miss. No more cops. No more fake notices. No more people pretending to own what wasn't theirs. The street stayed quiet in the best way possible. Ordinary days. Safe nights. That calm became the ending Karen never planned for. Years later, when my kid was grown, he asked me one last time about that day. Not the arrest. Not the badge. Just one question. Were you scared? I thought about it. Then answered honestly, I was. But fear doesn't get to decide. He smiled, like he finally understood. The truck still sits in the driveway sometimes. Older now, paint a little worn, engine still strong. People pass by and don't know the story anymore. And that's okay. Stories like this aren't meant to be loud forever. They're meant to change things, then disappear. Karen wanted control. She wanted no's. She wanted everyone to bow. What she left behind instead was proof. Proof that land matters. Proof that lies break under calm. Proof that power fails when it meets someone who knows their rights. And the final truth is simple, and it doesn't need shouting.